Welcome to this video about creating a select a measure parameter in Tableau. So we already looked at how to create an adjustable reference line. So let's go ahead and create a new sheet here. And we're going to call this one select a measure. So again, I want to grab my average percent fully vaccinated. So I'm going to right click and drag that out here to columns. Let's drop it as an average. I'm going to do the same thing with my COVID death rate. Right click and drag COVID death rate. Let's go into our average. Eventually we're going to change one of these, but for the time being, I want to break this out by our neighborhood names. So again, neighborhood name, drop that on detail. So very similar to kind of what we were doing last time, but instead of adding reference lines that can change, what I'm going to do for this one is me as the developer, I have hard coded this to look at our percent fully vaccinated compared to our COVID death rate. Well, what if my end user doesn't want to compare it to the COVID death rate, but maybe they want to compare it to the death count or the case count, or maybe the case rate. Maybe they want to compare it to percent positive. And so I've kind of hard coded it this way. But what we could do is we could provide that flexibility for our end user through a parameter where they get to choose which other measure they compare against our percent fully vaccinated. And with that, they could actually combine that with our adjustable reference line. So then instead of it being our average COVID death rate over here, they would really, as an end user, get to choose which measure are we comparing against our average fully vaccinated. So I want to first make the parameter. So I'm going to click that drop down arrow up here. Let's create the parameter. And for these ones, I like using action words like select, choose. So I'm going to say select a measure. And let's do a list of values. And what I like to do is I'm going to make the backend an integer. And so the backend value is what Tableau is looking at. And then this display as portion, that's what my end user is seeing. So for the backend, let's have 1. And then I'm going to say that 1 is our average COVID death rate. 2 is our average COVID death count. 3 is our average COVID case rate. 4 is our average COVID case count. And our 5th option here, let's do our average percent positive. So I can resize this so we can see these a little bit better. So again, these are going to be the display as is what my end user sees, but on the back end, Tableau is just expecting a 1, a 2, 3, 4, or a 5. Notice I can keep adding as many as I want. I've just stopped at 5, and so that's what we're going to go with. So at this point, I'm going to go and click OK. And then here's my select a measure. So I'm going to right click. Let's go ahead and show this. And then I'm going to expand it, and I want to see it as a single value list. Now, before I get too carried away with my numbers here, let's go ahead and bring out our ETL load date. I want month, day, year. Do February 15th. I'm going to add this to context. I'm also going to right click. Let's show filter. I want my single value drop down. Customize, get rid of the show all value. Edit title. As of date. And then I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Now notice I can move my parameter buttons over here, but nothing really changes with these. I like to compare it to, it's like a light switch, but if the light switch is not connected to a power source, then it's really not going to do anything. So what I need to do is, once I've created the parameter, I need to create a calculation that then uses that parameter somehow. So let's create the calculation. So I'm going to click our drop-down arrow, and I'm going to create a calculated field. And I'm going to call this selected measure. And then I'm going to copy and paste this. So this is what's called a case statement. So a case statement is going to look at a value. In this case, it's our select measure parameter. And then we're going to go through this and we're going to say when it's a 1, then I want it to return my average COVID death rate, which is what I'm telling my end user it is. If it's a 2, or when it's a 2, then I want the death count. If it's a 3, I want case rate. If it's a 4, I want case count. And then if it's a 5, I want my percent positive. Notice with this case statement, I could keep going with different values if I had them. And case statements are very similar. If you're looking at this and you're like, wow, this feels a lot like an if-then statement. They are very similar. Case statements, in my mind, perhaps are a little bit cleaner. But really, it's just going to go through each one of those options and then return whatever the result is based on this parameter. So again, I'm going to go ahead and click OK. So now what I want to do is instead of using our average COVID death here on the rows, I'm going to replace that with my selected measure. So now notice over here it says our selected measure, and it's currently set to COVID death rate. That's why nothing changed. But if I change this to our average COVID death count, notice my neighborhoods change because they are now being plotted on something different. If I change it to our average percent positive, I see that those dots change a lot. My average COVID case count, COVID case rates. And then I could even update my dates with these, and I get to see how my different values change. So what I could do is we could come back here now to my adjustable reference line. And what I would do is in our reference line grids, I would right click, edit this. And I would kind of have it go through these. And everywhere where it says average COVID death rate, what I would substitute in here is I would put in my selected measure. So then what that's going to do is it's going to check, is the selected measure, how does that compare to this reference line? And it's going to go through it that way. Now, one thing that might be a little bit weird with that is in our selected measure, we do have this percent positive. And so my reference line on this one is over here on our selected death rate. So this one ranges anywhere from 0,000 to like 50,000. Well, we're never going to have a percent positive at that time. So you might want to take that into consideration. Some things I would probably do here is I'm going to right click. Let's format this. I'm going to get rid of my grid lines. And I'm going to click on analytics here. And what I'm going to do is let's add a trend line, a linear trend line. So that this is going to show kind of the relationship between whatever my selected measure is and my percent fully vaccinated. So then as my end user clicks through each one of these, they get to see how these relationships change and update. And what I'm noticing as we kind of just are clicking through these now is it seems as though there's a negative relationship. So the more my average percent fully vaccinated increases, it seems like whatever my selected measure is decreasing. One last thing I do want to point out here, as far as formatting your tooltip, notice how it just says selected measure. One thing you can do to clean that up is if you click on your tooltip, if I select the selected measure, and then I'm going to insert my parameter value of select a measure. Now if I click OK, now it will say my my average COVID death count. But then if I change this, it now says average COVID case count. So that's kind of just a little trick you can do. If your select a measure names are appropriate, you can embed those into the tooltip, and then that becomes a lot more meaningful as far as what information we're showing. So in summary, you should be able to create an adjustable reference line parameter. You should be able to create a select a measure parameter We hope you have enjoyed these videos and that they have been informative and equipped you with the skills necessary for utilizing parameters for your own data visualization purposes.